Dr. Daria, and you are watching What Wise Women Want here on Public Access Television, Comcast Channel 13. Every week, we bring you panels of women to discuss topics. Hopefully, it will help you to make informed choices for yourself, your family, your children, your community. Ladies, we are a majority. We are 52% of the population, and we have 85% of the purchasing power. We'd like to see you use that purchasing power to make choices for everyone. If you would like to learn more and know the topics in advance of what is happening on our programs every week, you can go to our website at www.whatwisewomenwant.com. And remember, wise is spelled with a Z. There you'll also find details about every single one of our panel members who you see, and you can contact them in the event that you need to following our programs. In addition, there's a place for you to submit your questions. We tape the program a week in advance, so if you have any questions about the upcoming topics, you can do a question there, and we will gladly put those questions on the air. We also have fireside chats at City Space on the third Saturday of the month, and you can participate in the discussions there. This week, our panel discussion is about daycare, preschool, home care, what's best for your child. And we have a panel of women who are experts in all of these areas. I'm going to start to my left. First, we have Connie Papke. She's a field specialist manager at Child Nutrition, Inc., and she oversees home daycare. To her right is Jennifer McDonald, who's the director and owner of our Neighborhood Child Development Center, which is a Reggio, Emilia-inspired school. To her right is Candy Daffern. Candy is a Head Start director with MACA here in Charlottesville. And to her right is Launi Agee. She's Early Childhood Development Specialist. Now, the first thing we need to do is to define for our audience what is preschool, what is daycare, what is home daycare, because I don't think people really know the differences in all those different categories. So Launi, would you start off for us, please?
Sure. In my experience, and I did start my career as a Head Start teacher, and that was back in 1966, at the very inception of Head Start. Head Start was a model that was directed towards children of lower income, and it is a model that has basically been on tenterhooks since its inception. It's never funded well. It's always, are we going to have enough money for the next year? And it's been that way, I'm told. Even now, I hoped over the years it would get better. Of course, anything starting out starts on a shoestring often. But it's proven itself time and time again in terms of benefiting these children, in terms of helping them to become more school-ready, learning ready.
So Head Start is a preschool?
Is a preschool, yes.
And so what's a daycare?
So a daycare is something that is for working parents to leave their children during their working days. Now, some daycares do make an effort to have some preschool activities involved, but typically they involve infants from 6 weeks to children of school age and then after school care. So you have everything in that model from tiny babies to toddlers, ratios that are met, not necessarily particularly well.
And we'll get into that
and we'll
category.
Get into, yes. Also, in a daycare setting, a child can be there as many as 12 hours a day.
Wow.
Typically in preschool, they're there for 3, maybe 4 hours a day.
Okay.
So they don't stay and have lunch and take naps and so forth.
And what is home daycare, Connie?
Home daycare what I do is for regulated providers, they can be either state licensed or voluntarily registered, which means they are regulated, they get visits, and they are allowed anywhere from 5 to 12 children in their home. They are different, some better than others, some more educational based. They have different curriculums that they do, and some it's not as organized, and they don't have the tools to do that.
So then the preschool is the place where there's a kind of an educational component. A daycare may or may not be, and just a drop-off babysitting sort of component. Home care is one or the other as well. So
I was going to say, I don't know that I always agree. We give these educational establishments, and I'm going to say educational establishments because that is my hope that they would all be that way. But we give them different names and titles, and I think sometimes we associate meanings that maybe we don't explicitly explain. And I've had sometimes people that I talk to, and they think of daycare, and they associate that with how it's funded. That daycare is privately funded. Parents will pay for that. And preschools are state funded, and they'll associate it that way. Sometimes I've had people talk about daycare being the wraparound that will be open from 7 in the morning until 7 at night if that's what you need, and preschool will be that part-time work. And in some cases we'll think about daycare as being the care, and preschool as being learning, where that happens. And I sometimes think that, a child going into that setting, whether it's care or home care, they're not making those delineations.
Right.
They're not thinking about, is it learning that I'm doing today or caring today? And perhaps maybe we shouldn't either, and try to segment all of that, because I think a child can't learn in a preschool unless we're caring for them. If we have a child that isn't toilet trained, we need to give them care and attention and change them, because otherwise their needs aren't going to be met. And the vice versa is true. If we have a child who is in a daycare center, we can't really say that they're never learning when they're here. And I don't know, sometimes we give them definitions that I think we need to be able to establish the differences of them. But we probably also need to remember how much they overlap too, and how much they should overlap.
Right.
Because I would expect all daycares, how we're defining them, to be really good learning preschools as well. And I would really want all of the preschools to offer really good care throughout the day too.
Yeah.
That would be my...
What were you going to say?
Well, I think that we define it differently. We call our program a child development center. We ask parents to not call it a daycare. Daycare definitely has a negative connotation. And so I cringe when I hear the word, because I've been in really bad daycare situations, and there's a lot out there. But that's not every program. And it's not every full-time program, and every part-time program is not a great preschool.
Right.
And so I think maybe we do focus too much on the definition of what it is. But for us, I think it's philosophy. What do you believe should be happening during the time that the children are with you? What do you believe will help the children learn? What is your goal from the time that they're spending with you?
You're asking this to the parents.
Well, from the program's point of view.
Okay,
So that's
yourself.
of yourself, of the program that you're visiting. Is this a program where the director and teachers believe that children are real people and deserve to be here cared for and learning? Or are they just here for a job? Are they just here because they have a rigid point of view, or because it's convenient?
Well, and one of them in this town is a learning lab where children are like lab rats, and students sit on one side observing children on the other side, and I have a lot of questions about that as well. What is it that parents really want for their children in terms of caring for them? And we know a lot about how the brain works. And the way the brain works is that from the time a child is born until approximately the age of 6 to 8, this is when their formative years are, and when they are forming all of their developmental strategies and their brain development and all the other behavior patterns of their life. So these are really critical times. And when I look at, in these times, how a lot of the regulations don't necessarily follow suit with the research that we have, it's a bit appalling sometimes to me. So let's talk about some of those regulations, and that is how many children per adult? And we have, many kinds of regulations, and some of them stifle the things that we want to do for children, and some of them enhance. So we're talking about the educational level of the people in daycares and preschools, or the number per child, or so give us some information on the regulations. Anybody?
Well, in the daycare setting, my experience as a daycare director is that unfortunately we call all of these people teachers, and the private sector daycare centers publish a monthly guide, shall we call it, that the teachers have no specific time to sit down and even read. Their requirement is that they be able to basically breathe and show up for work. I mean, that's a pretty minimal requirement, but of course they're paid what? Oh, minimum wage.
Exactly.
And yet we're still calling them, giving them a title of teacher, which for me diminishes what a teacher at any level really is.
Exactly.
And we don't respect our teachers either financially or socially. And unfortunately, when we use this model for daycare, rather than calling them what they are, which is daycare workers, and that doesn't mean that they aren't important, they're
Right.
critically important to the well-being of these children. But we need to differentiate between someone who's taking care of them, hopefully nurturing, helping them with social skills, helping them with learning how to live in our society. But at the same time, we're in the daycare model that we have now in this country, not requiring anything to further the development of these children.
And I think what's what I see, one of the issues that I see is that if we are molding the minds of children and the hearts of children, and we have people with high school diplomas who are illiterate in those classrooms, because what can you attract with minimum wage? What does that do for our children? Now, granted, sometimes they're very caring, loving nurturing people,
Mm-hmm.
which is perfectly fine. Again, what is the objective? Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Well, I think I'm really grateful that we have the licensing regulations that we do. But they're designed to keep children safe and healthy. That's all they do. They don't support children's development by any means. I don't know if they could design regulations that could support children's development without stifling the creativity of different philosophies. Our program is seeking NACE accreditation, which does kind of go beyond to say this is a place of learning, not just a daycare. But I think the licensing regulations, we're actually lucky here in Virginia. They do require ongoing professional development training, 16 hours a year. Not a lot, but at least it's something. And it also gives us an outlet to reach out to those teachers or those daycare workers that really, maybe they do want to know more about child development. So I think the regulations, they can be challenging, but they're really just to keep children safe and healthy. And I think sometimes they're overemphasized.
Well, and also can go to the extreme. I mean, I remember being on the playground and having to, the slats being measured, and
Right.
sometimes, and you don't get licensed if you don't follow every single one of these guidelines. So, again, we all agree that it's the people. So I know, Jennifer, you don't have high school graduates as...
No.
Do you have high school graduates?
No, we don't have high school
Neither
graduates.
one of you do.
But at one time we did. We certainly did. It's now part of the requirements of Head Start that we are beginning to increase our qualifications. And I think a lot of that has come from educational research. Certainly there was a piece of research called the EPI project that came out of the United Kingdom, Effective Practice in Preschool Education. And that research was very clear that there was a direct positive correlation between quality of provision and the qualifications of the staff. And that's where you started to talk about how high school graduates may very well be caring, but if we know that half of the brain connections that they're going to be making at the time that they, before they're 6 and reach going into statutory education, we really do need to be able to have professionals who are working with children who understand child development, so that when they see that teachable moment and that they can structure, plan, and aid that child's development as best as possible. And I certainly agree with you that it is so important that we have regulations. I don't want to be leading staff where a child is going to have an accident and support. However, we need to realize that those regulations are the bare minimum, and we need to be able to develop it a little bit further. The point that I think is really important to think about is, Head Start programs were funded and began its origin because they realized that there was a sector of population that were not meeting and we're not doing well enough. The vast majority of people enter into schooling systems, they graduate and go on and they lead a productive life. But for a certain population, our vulnerable, our at-risks, were not doing that. And this investment was to give them that proper head start in life. Well, if we're putting that time in and that money and that investment in at the time when it's going to make the difference, that's an investment later on in life. And that's where sometimes when we look at educational sectors and think about what's money going into secondary schools, and this is a shame because my husband is a secondary school teacher, but we invest a lot of money there. If they take a time and take just a fraction of that and invest in the early year sector,
when it's the most important.
We'll help them out too.
Exactly.
We'll make their job easier.
But there's lots of different theories of what that would be. I mean, our program is a lot different than other programs. We're Reggio inspired, and we may or may not get into that later. But I think you were talking about a teacher that can see a learning opportunity and help shape it, but the Reggio approach is much more hands-off and helping to set up that experience but let the child have it. Mm-hmm. And we have teachers that come from a lot of different backgrounds, and even the regulations that we have now are very restrictive about teachers that have degrees in non-child related fields. And I have some great teachers that didn't end up getting their degree in a child-related field, and they are treated as if they have a high school diploma by the licensing regulations. Right. Not that they necessarily have all the child development knowledge that they need, but they have a bachelor's degree in something that tells me that they know how to think critically, they know how to solve problems and how to commit to something. Then if I can bring them into the classroom and they show me that they're loving and caring, and I can help them through the professional development training on child development, then they can be some of the best teachers.
Of course.
I want to move on with, move away from teachers, but I just want to make a comment about some of the things that I've seen in daycare classrooms, and that is that to save money a lot of times, and this is again the way that teachers, quote unquote, daycare professionals are treated. And what they will do is around 3 o'clock when the numbers go down, they take the children and move them all into another classroom, and then they let that teacher go to save money paying for her by the hour. Then they move, they keep on moving these children around. These are babies and infants. So, I often wonder, really, when I look at a school like that or a program like that, I ask myself, are they really there for the children, or is this about the bottom line? So let's get into the food, for example, that children are fed. We have guidelines, state guidelines in terms of, now I've been in classrooms where they felt that, in schools where they thought popcorn was the nutritional equivalent to, in my estimation, a steak. I mean, the way they were serving it. So tell us a little bit about nutrition in schools.
Well, I was
Daycares
going to
especially.
say, the home daycares, you guys are talking about classrooms and that kind of thing, and some parents don't want their kids being that young going into a big classroom situation. They like them in the home, and it's more nurturing and smaller, not so many numbers, and hopefully you have, you know, and we go to a lot of trouble to try to tell these providers, you're not a babysitter. You know, you have gone above and beyond, you know, what Nana does, or, you know, whatever. They've had their background checks, they've had their home inspected, their regulations, and this is an in-home, and some of those regulations are very, very rigid, and, you know, and they are set on their numbers and their points, and they are monitored, and you hopefully that, you know, and it just depends what the parents are looking for. So some of them like them to be in the home, and it's just more nurturing rather than a classroom type situation.
But the menus that you then monitor from
Yeah,
the
if
food
they-
standpoint, then that's a, go ahead. with
Different.
that,
If
yeah.
they are on the food program, they have to follow the USDA guidelines, which is part of the School Lunch Act. So they have certain criteria for breakfast, certain criteria for lunch and dinner, and certain criteria for snack. And they have to meet these guidelines. And popcorn is not creditable. So, and we go as monitors and go and visit and make sure that they are serving the food and that we are educating them as far as nutrition, what is creditable, not creditable, better choices, and that kind of thing. So it is loosely based on it's on the School Lunch Act, so they follow the same kind of guidelines there.
What is the best ratio between an adult to child? And I'm guessing it has to do with ages and things like that in terms of, you know, the regulations. What's the best ratio for, you know, children? and
Well, they're
adults?
only allowed 16 points. That's whether they are state licensed
What does
or
that mean,
voluntary.
16 points?
Each child, like from infant to 15 months, they are 4 points each. From 16 months.
You're going to have to explain what 4 points are.
Okay, they are.
A total of 16, so you
Right,
can
so
have
the
4
infants are 4 points.
Okay.
Actually, one provider can have 4
That's
infants.
what I, yeah. So
4.
that would be 16 points.
If they're allowed 5 kids, they couldn't have 5 infants because 5 infants, 5 times 4 is 20. You're not allowed to have more than 16
So you
points.
So
3
for home
infants
care,
and
it's
2,
on a
yeah.
it's on a point system,
Right.
And each caregiver can have a certain number of points, and then each age group is given a point amount.
Yes.
So you can have 4 to 5 children in a home, but it's very different in terms of
Age-wise,
the.
it's a mixed age group.
So what are the age? What is
So
the appropriation?
For our program, we operate at a 1 to 3 ratio for infants, and the state licensing regulations is 1 to 4. And the state defines infants up to 16 months.
Yeah.
So then from 16 months to 2, it's 1 to 5.
I think it goes.
Our 1-year-old class, it operates at a ratio of 1 to 4, and then for 2+, it's 1 to 8, I believe. And we operate at 1 to 5.
Because when I was doing it, it was 1 to 12,
That's
which was
a lot.
Right.
horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
When you got to the 2-year-old and above.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have 2-year-olds that are on potty trained, and you have one person, and you have all of these little beings. You know, never mind, and the thing that always horrified me, what do you do with that many children if you have a fire?
Exactly.
How do you safely, you know,
Evacuate.
you know, that many children?
So how do you determine, okay, so we've discussed the different, you know, regulations and the teachers and all those kinds of things. So for parents who are watching, how do they know how to judge what's best for their baby or their infant in terms of, you know, I'm just walking in, I'm a mom, I'm a new mom, this is my first child, I have to go back to school, I only have 6 weeks or so, you know, to get back. So how do I judge, you know, where to take my child?
I always think the general rule is less is more. If you've got more adults to your children in general, that's better. Keep the ratios as small as you can. Your adults are and it's interesting, I remember you talking about how people would shift children around to save money and let the other one go. As a manager, as well as somebody who's worked in preschools before I became a manager, I understand the difference of setting budgets and the need to be able to make sure that everything is around. But if that sort of practice is happening, I think the managers probably got their priorities wrong?
Well,
Because
generally
they
they're
shouldn't
daycare
be.
owners.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yes,
They not
and
necessarily-
I'll interject. Some of these companies now, not private daycare owners, because there are people like you that you're not a company, but they're large companies. They're all over the United States. They create these models that they go in and they plunk down like McDonald's around the different things. And their bottom line is, and their bottom line is how much. And I was told to stop feeding the children, so much food because they weren't. And I'm sorry, that, managing, it's kind of like, no.
And they're not a project.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, in some of the, the company, the franchises, actually they aren't franchises, they're actually owned by the ones that I'm familiar with. They're owned by a company, and they're just put, different places. But
that might be better why you go to a home daycare.
Well, exactly. And I think for infants, truly, being in a home daycare now, when I was running this particular center, and it was a brand new center, so you're not talking about dealing with issues about, facility issues that, would be difficult to keep clean and so forth. And we went through a rigorous, how do you handle diaper changing, for heaven's sakes? And it involved wiping down papers on the changing table, washing of hands before and immediately after, before you pick the child up, and then disinfecting. And I mean, we went through everything. And even with all of those precautions, you had babies that were sick. And they're sick because they're just assaulted by the air that's passing through the center even. So if you're in a daycare setting, home daycare setting, or a smaller, not huge facility, I think the child and the parents better served, because guess what? The person that you hand your child to in the morning is going to be the same person that is talking to you that evening and going to be able to tell you. I mean, we kept records and we said, how many diaper changes, we did all of the things that were possible.
Requires them to do that too.
And we did all that, but at the same time, that person that you handed your child to first thing in the morning is not going to be the person that you're getting them from in the evening. So you can't possibly really know what kind of day did your baby have.
Not always.
Not always.
I mean, our program, we do continuity of care, and I think that's something parents can look for when they walk in and say, who's with my children? Are they being passed from room to room? Continuity of care, our caregivers move with the children. So when you come in, your child has a primary caregiver. That caregiver is responsible for a small group, but they're also part of a larger teaching team, which gives them not only the support and the professional development, but also someone to talk to when they're having a hard time. We work really hard to create a community where our parents have other parents to talk to, our parents have opportunities to come to parenting classes and to volunteer in our program and see what it's like every day. And I think if you can find a high quality program, that's great for children. I think that includes some high quality home daycares. That's not always the case with with home daycares, and it's not always the case with center-based.
But any of them, any of them.
And I think one of the things, one of the things that I notice when I go into daycares and the various preschools and things like that is it's the looking at the children. If they're happy, if they're engaged, they come and talk to you, they're smiling. Whereas a lot of the children in daycares, they look like this, and they're it's from all the stimulation and from the large numbers that they become overstressed. And then we haven't talked about any of this, but in my personal opinion as a therapist, when you move up the starting from the time the child is born, and when you look at brain development and things of that nature, and bonding and stress relationships, I'm beginning to wonder whether or not all of our children and the generations of children who have been in daycare, in fact, may be the reason why we have low immunities as adults and, violence is in teen boys and things like that. And these are some of the things that we need to look at. And of course, that's not what this program is about today, because we're talking about, we haven't really talked enough about the Reggio school. And I happen to have studied the Reggio schools, and I know a lot about them. And daycares basically started after World War II, when moms went to work because of the war, and their children were left at home, and there was nobody really there to watch them unless you had grandparents and extended families. And so that's when daycares really took off in the United States. The Reggio schools, you want to tell us a little bit? Do you know the history?
Yeah, well, the Reggio schools were started after World War II. The city of Reggio Emilia is what the schools are named after. And they got money from the government to rebuild, and they were disgusted with the institutional settings that were available for these young children during the war, and they decided that the children deserved more.
Weren't many of the women impregnated by soldiers? They were single moms?
I never heard that.
Okay.
No, but they came together as a community to build the schools, and they wanted a place that was aesthetically pleasing. We all know how much our environment affects us, and we rarely look at the environments we provide for children. Are they interesting and engaging? Are they calm and supportive? So our environment we're very mindful about what we put in our environments. It's a relationship-based program. Because they built it after World War II, it was a community project. We work really hard to have those relationships, like I talked about, the continuity of care, but also just partnering with families as a part of the community, because our families don't have the extended families that our parents had.
Right.
And they need that. They need that support. So.
And the Head Start program had begun. Are you familiar with the history of when the Head Start program began?
It was 1965.
Yes, and I was in 66, so when I say I was right at the beginning of it, yes.
And it's interesting, when you look at Head Start and the programs of all of the tackling against poverty, we often associate it with Kennedy and his presidential reign. But funnily enough, after Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson came in, and although probably didn't have the charisma that Kennedy had probably the tenacity to just scratch away at that scab of poverty. And it was through his reign under Sergeant Shriver that really decided we needed to be able to have a program that worked with children who were at risk of not succeeding, not becoming those productive members of society. And I think the unique thing about Head Start, and it's not to say that Head Start programs can't run with a Reggio ethos, and there's so many things I love about it, or a high scope ethos, and actually many of them do. But I think the thing that was always so interesting, and I feel passionate about with Head Start, is that it came with the assumption that it's not just a program for your child. This is a program for your whole family, and the expectation that parents will become engaged in that program too, because we know we will only ever deal with a section of that child's life. And if we give them the best curriculum and the best education and the best facilities that they're in, that will only be the small part of their environment. And unless we try to affect the differences that are happening in the home and start to really think about other things that may very well affect it, like that family's financial status, their employment, their education themselves too, their parenting skills, the nutrition in the household. Unless we start building in all of those programs, then actually the effects that we may be able to do in the short term for a child is going to be short-lived. So let's try and put in all of those. And that's the lovely thing that I think about Head Start. Interestingly enough, I've recently come into this post from England, and England have made a program called Children's Centres, Sure Start Children's Centres. So Sure Start Children's Centres literally have taken all the great things about Head Start and said, yes, we'll have some of that and adopt it in our country too. So the legacy of Head Start is now international.
Yes. So have any of you ever looked at or discussed, and by the way, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, And this is what wise women want on Charlottesville Public Access Television, Comcast Channel 13. And we're here today discussing daycare, preschool, home daycare, and what is best for your children. We have a panel of women today who are very adept at every aspect of this. Connie Papke, Field Specialist Manager at Child Nutrition, Inc. Jennifer McDonald, owner of our Neighborhood Child Development Center, a Reggio Emilia inspired school. We have Candy Daffern, who's Head Start Director for MACA. And we also have Lori Agee, who's an Early Childhood Development Specialist. Now, there have been many studies that I discovered that talks about, okay, we've put all this money into daycare and preschool and all that. By the time they get to second grade, you know, this was supposed to be a head start for children and to get them developmentally equal to everybody else so that by the time they got into school, everybody was equal. And yet, many of the studies show that by the time they get to second grade, whether they've gone to preschool, daycare, or not, everyone's equal, so to speak, depending on their, not even depending on their socioeconomic intelligence and all of that. So what, do you find that as well? Do people come back to you and talk to you about the children who have graduated from your programs or anything like that?
I have a lot of daycare providers that have done, and they have graduations, and they have walls of their children, and they're taking care of their children now. And some of them have, those are the really good ones, but they're great. They're like family to them. And you were asking before about how does a single mom, say, go about it. In the state of Virginia, they will pay for child care if you are qualified through social services. And the requirement has to be that they are regulated one way, shape, or form, which is state license or voluntary registration. So I don't know if does social services pay for anything if they go to daycare?
We accept child care subsidy. It certainly doesn't meet our tuition costs, but it does help families. We have other ways that they can, like I said, participate in the program and get tuition discounts that way. But I think going into a program, you need to look at, is this just an academic program or a babysitter for now, or is it going to be a part of my family? Because that's probably the biggest indicator of the long-term effect. If it's a community model, if it's based on supporting the family as a whole, then you have a huge long-term effect as opposed to just for those few years.
A lot of parents just have no idea the choices that are out there.
Exactly.
And if they are
exactly
income eligible, they just get a list from social services and they just go, and they really have no idea what the provider has done to be able to earn that status.
Exactly.
So they just really don't know what the choices are out there.
And it's interesting because, you know, even though we're talking about daycare and preschool and home care and all that, you can hire a nanny and still have problems, as we have seen in the courts and all that. So how can we help parents to really take a look at, you know, do you have any criteria we can give them whatsoever?
I just would say one thing about criteria. If you have a child that's old enough, say a preschool-age child, age 2.5, 3 years old, one of the things that if you're looking at a program, taking your child to the program to spend a morning and spending time yourself observing what goes on. And in my situation, I took my daughter, who never in her whole life ever threw a tantrum. When she left, she was so undone by the experience of being there for a number of reasons, which don't necessarily need to be mentioned, but she laid down in the middle of the hallway and threw a tantrum. So she told me very clearly that she had no desire to be in this setting. And part of that's paying attention to your child and your individual child's needs. Some children need small settings and they thrive in a very small home setting. Other children are gregarious and need to have the stimulation and the ongoing activities that are happening all over the place. And part of that's knowing your child.
Okay.
I think watch the teachers. Look at the teachers and see, are they interacting with the children? Are they happy to be there? Are they having positive things to say? Are the children allowed to do what they do, to explore, or is everything closed for no apparent reason? And just watch to see if the teachers love the children and the children love the teachers, and there's positive interactions going on there.
Absolutely.
And that you can come and visit anytime you want.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Open
that's
door
always
policy
open. Yeah.
that-
Yes.
So my child, I bring them to daycare, preschool, whatever, and the next morning they're crying and saying, "I don't want to go." Is that an indication, or is that a good?
That's a yes and no, I think, because there is
Okay.
a transition period that goes on. There are times when you just don't feel like going anyway. I think that you have to consistently encourage them and help them make the transition, but sometimes it means they really aren't comfortable being there. And again, it takes some time. You need to have the consistency, I think, for a while. Help the child, because sometimes it's just the separation. They don't want to be away from you at all. And again, it's so age dependent, you know, the whole separation anxiety of 8-month-olds. You know, they were fine when they were 7 months, and all of a sudden now they hate going to to daycare, and they're now 8 months old. And it happened over a weekend, you know, but that's part of understanding as a parent the developmental stages of children too. Because there is an ebb and flow.
Teachers. You
Sometimes
can talk.
it's the,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
Sometimes it's the parents even. If they take too long to drop off,
They
I'll
need-
talk to daycare providers, and these children, they know exactly what they're doing, and you know.
And the
they-
parent
What
is-
age were we talking about here?
Oh, any age.
1.5.
Right.
They will put on the
just-
show when mom or dad are there, and the longer mom or dad take to leave, the bigger it gets. But the second they leave,
Everything's
it's
fine. It's
It's
amazing.
right back
I
to
think
Yeah.
children are amazing at being able to read the anxiety of their
Absolutely.
parents.
Exactly.
So if a parent isn't really sure and comfortable, they will exhibit signs of anxiety, probably hanging around a little bit more just to make sure they're okay. And of course that child is reading all the time. Mum's
Yeah,
hanging
right. They
around a
know.
little
They
bit.
know.
Maybe she's not happy about this either. This might not be a very safe place to be.
That's right.
So I'm going to feel anxious too. And I think you're right that sometimes they leave and the child isn't comfortable.
And you can help the parent and know whether or not this is okay, because you can have the parent step outside and see. And it literally, we've seen it, I'm sure you have too, where the child's just absolutely undone. As soon as that door closes, they turn around and go play. You know, so it's very helpful.
And I have to say, I've seen the other extreme
Oh,
too.
absolutely, absolutely.
Where they're sobbing. And,
Oh, absolutely,
from
and
their
they're totally,
toes,
yes,
that
absolutely.
they're
There's
missing
no
mom or dad.
question about that.
Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Oh, I didn't really have much to add. I think that separation changes over time. I think that different children experience different things. We've had children that had been in our program since 1 with the same caregiver at almost 3 started saying, "I don't want to go to school." And their mother was like, "What's going on? Is something going on at school?" And it was just something she was going through. I don't know if it was she wasn't feeling well or what, but she was able to come to us and say, "She's saying this, how do I help her?" And we were able to say, "We'll talk about it on the way in the car and say, you're going to see so-and-so at school and wave to them and give them a high five, and I bet you'll work on painting today." And so you can certainly help children through that transition, but I think paying attention to yourself, there's a difference between feeling sad that you're leaving your child for the day and feeling nervous that your child's not
Or
being
guilty.
taken care of.
Or guilty.
Yeah.
Guilty is one of the biggest
Guilty.
And I
problems.
think when you were talking about what advice would you give a parent, what would they look for? One of the things I would say is how, if it was my friend who was looking for a place for their child to be, is how comfortable would they feel in discussing that their child might be causing and having a bit of anxiety coming into the car in the journey because they're not happy about school. Because if they had then a teacher who then said, I can see this anxiety, let's work on it, let's build a social story about the journey, let's try to help them understand what this process is, because they're experiencing change, and we all react differently to change, grown-ups as well as children. If you had that attitude of let's work to it would indicate to me that that was a daycare that was really sensitive to the needs of the child and wanting to make sure that they were happy and confident within that educational establishment. If it was somebody who just said, oh, well, they all do that and it's fine,
Exactly.
Right.
I
then,
think that
yes.
might be a little bit more concerning.
So that's a little bit more of an indicator
Yeah.
in terms of.
The
So
commitment.
yes, absolutely. And I've seen all ends of the spectrum myself in terms of, you know, parents with anxiety. And I've also seen children who had difficulty in terms with bonding issues and separation issues. So, you know, unless you're a professional, sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish what is going on with your child. And, you know, I see a lot of children in therapy. And so, you know, sometimes it's, especially if they're an only child, you might be dealing with manipulation. I mean, there's all kinds of things involved. So again, there's not one size fits all or one answer to any of these things. But for parents to be very, very aware and, you know, search out and visit and, you know, go to these different places to make sure that, you know, this is for your child.
And Daria, you had asked too a little bit ago about how do we take this effort that we're putting into early childhood development and extend it into the older children and help it continue. And I really think that if we could find a way to help parents understand the importance of being present when they are with their children. If they are required to work for whatever reason it happens to be, the time that they spend with the children, they need to be with the children, not on their cell phone, not on their, you know, doing other things that are so important. Let the laundry pile up if that's what's necessary. But how important they are to their child. It's not a question of you have the child, you put them in daycare, you go to work, you pay the bills. You have this child because hopefully you want to enjoy being with this child.
Trust me, in therapy, I ask that question constantly. Why did you have a child?
And another thing
well,
I think
the
we need
opposite
to,
side, the helicopter parenting
Yeah.
side
Well,
is what we
yeah.
hear, and it's probably different.
Explain that for
depending
people who
on
don't understand what helicopter
this-
parent is.
They're hovering over the children, and whether it's, I mean, I gave a tour this morning to a family where the mom just followed this little 1-year-old around, and he was fine. He was off and looking and interested in the things we had in the classroom, and if she would have stood back, she could have observed that. But sometimes parents are so overly involved, so right over top of their children that they don't even see the learning. They don't even see and enjoy the time. They don't take the minute away to let them play outside while I do laundry. And I think it creates so much stress and anxiety, both for the parents and the child.
And the technology today, you know, between the, I thought it was bad with the television, but even, I mean, I've been in family homes where families have said to me, we don't communicate anymore, will you come and help me? And the first thing I do is come to dinner with the family, and they're all sitting texting, and they're asking why they don't communicate with each other. And so, you know, we live in a completely different world with technology right now, and one of the things I saw one day, which just absolutely appalled me, was I was walking on the downtown mall, and this woman was pushing her baby in a stroller while she was texting. And all of a sudden, she hit a bump, and the baby went flying, and she kept on texting.
oh my gosh.
While the rest of us ran after the baby. And you know, I often wonder, you know, why is it some people are having, you know, what is it about all this? Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, have we really completely disconnected from ourselves and each other in terms of, you know, not just, and the pressures, the social pressures that we get on television and what you're supposed to, you know, your child should be in football and baseball and do sports.
This is getting back to the whole, what do we do for them as they get older? Well, they start them off, they're not developmentally ready to use their bodies the way the coaches are demanding that they use their bodies to, quote, be the best. And they spend any family time that might exist, because now they only have 2 days a week, to run to practice, to games, and it owns the family.
Right.
And I think we need to talk about the importance. You used to go out to the sand lot and hit balls around and pick up, you picked up teams. And so you knew how to relate to one another, because as a neighborhood group of kids, they learned who was going to be the leader, or who was going to be captain, who was going to do this, and who's going to, and it evolved. They learned how to interact.
And social interactions.
And we've totally robbed them of that, because we have an adult that's calling the shots.
Exactly.
Or they're in a neighborhood that they can't do
Or
that
they can't do that, exactly, which is a
it's-
whole nother issue. But there's something better than organized sports that take over people's lives.
And that's where I think, again, coming from a different country, that at preschools, daycare,
We did say
whatever
you came from
settings-
England,
yes,
didn't we, at some
yes,
point?
we did.
Yeah, I think I said it. But I think coming from a different country, preschools, daycare has a real place to play. The idea of being able to go outside and explore and look in the garden, look for bugs, and just dig in the dirt, make mud pies,
Yes.
and we're not doing that. And if we go outside, it seems, certainly in the state of Virginia, surrounded by bark chipping, because heaven forbid
And
one
plastic.
child
Yes.
fall over and bump their
Skin
head.
their
And,
knee.
and again, going back to the regulations, it is the last thing that I want to do is to be responsible for a child who may hurt themselves. I don't want to endorse any accidents that would happen, but I do think that sometimes a child being able to run and perhaps trip over and scrape their knee teaches them a little bit of safety, that maybe I shouldn't have been doing that on the bumpy path, and then they get to be able to make choices in order to keep themselves safe. And
Well,
I think
there's
that's a
even-
good point with the regulations.
Yes.
That the regulations they're health and safety regulations, and we are a very nature-based. We have lots of injury reports, partially because toddlers are clumsy, and partially because we encourage them to take risks, and we help them to talk about climbing and falling. And I think if you are only focused on health and safety, you miss all of that.
Exactly.
All of that.
Like places don't have swings because, oh my
Exactly.
gosh, somebody might, and my gosh, what does that do developmentally? Swinging, think about it. Bilateral development, come on.
Well, I took over an after-school program once to substitute for somebody, and I thought, my God, these children have been in this building all day. They haven't ever come out. And I took them all outside, and we bypassed the playground and went out into the woods. And I thought the principal was going to have a heart attack. Luckily, I raised my children a little bit differently, and they were outside all the time. And, at 5 years old, they were climbing 10-foot trees. But what they learned was balance. They learned foreshortening. They learned, perception. And these are when you are in front of a flat screen all the time, or not having relationships with people, what kinds of communication skills are you developing, and interpersonal
And if
skills?
you talk to any occupational therapist, they will begin to talk about proprioception, senses, and that's the body, the sense of yourself in their surrounding world, and that a child needs to have that stimulation to be able to do that, because there's no way that they can do sitting down and writing unless they have had that stimulation and satiation at that early age. And yet, we don't go outside. I'm amazed.
It's just horrifying. I say to a child, what's your best subject? Recess? And they go, oh, we don't have recess. It's like, oh my gosh, these poor children are literally locked down. And getting back to, again, how do we continue it? Well, we can't take these children in elementary school. And my worst days as a teacher were the days you couldn't go outside because these poor little people were ready to explode.
And that's another good thing with home daycare. They do take them outside. I mean, they have their regulations state they have to have certain height of fences, and they're really monitored on that, but at least they get to go outside.
I do find it quite funny. You live in Virginia, where the weather is amazing.
Fabulous,
I grew up in England, where it rained 3/4 of the year, and we still went outside. There was no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
I grew up in northern New York, so when my teachers say it's too cold, I
know.
say, find some jackets.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, one of my monikers is we live in boxes, we drive in boxes, we work in boxes, and we wonder why we don't think outside of the box. And we're not creative anymore. It's because, we're constantly confining ourselves. And, there's nowhere to stretch and to breathe and to get, be in touch with all the
To be real.
surroundings. Well, you know, I studied with Native Americans, and I was amazed. There was a group of a few elders, and they had a group of Native American young children. They were 4, 5, 6 years old, and they were sitting around a tree. And what I discovered in the course of the conversation that was going on was that the elder was teaching the children geometry and mathematics with the plants, with the vines that were going up the tree, with the distance between the leaves. And I thought, oh my gosh, these children are learning geometry and mathematics, and they don't even know that they're learning it. It's in context in nature, and they're connected with nature all the time. And then we wonder why we're destroying our environment when from the very beginning of their lives, they're not making that connection.
Everything is
themselves.
sanitized.
Well, they're on a rubber surface, right?
Right.
Exactly.
You know,
And brain research and child development would tell you that a child is more likely to learn and remember those activities when it's based in a real life, meaningful, contextual relationship. So far easier. I have no idea how I learned how to do trigonometry, and I probably would struggle to do it, but perhaps if it was done sitting around a tree, I might remember it.
And that's one of the things, you know, about education. We have become so theoretical from the very stages of child development when it should be tactile, when they should be touching things and exploring and putting things in their mouth and, you know, eating mud or, you know, those kinds of things. And we've lost all that connection, you know, with our sensuous environment, so to speak. And here we are, you know, theorizing everything. And then when they get out into the world, you know, after they graduate from high school, automatically they're supposed to make all these connections. And they don't, because from the very early stages of their lives, you know, we've disconnected them.
they've been told what to do. And one
That's
of the,
not every program.
No,
it isn't,
but
of course. But when I
Well
worked in
remembered.
a cooperative preschool here in Charlottesville, and I would take the children outside on the playground and let them do what? Oh, play. And I was chastised by the parents because I didn't have planned activities for them outside. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you want, why they can go on the play structures and they would sit and sometimes just make patterns in the sand. It doesn't matter if they got to choose or they chose who was going to play tag or whatever it was.
But we're programmed now that
Yes.
every single minute has to be planned.
programmed. Exactly.
There's no freedom, and this is why children can't sleep.
And
Because
think.
there's no time, and
Right.
the play time, you know, we didn't even get into play, you know, using clothes and acting out things, and this is how children get to know about themselves by acting, you know, trying on parts and different clothing and wigs and hats and all those kinds of things.
You alluded to something earlier where you were talking about testing and test the children at this age. When we're talking about preschool, they show that when they go into second grade, it doesn't make any difference, or some of the research and data doesn't make any difference. I wanted to draw on, just because, as you were saying, that element, in many cases, and I have read that research too, but there is other research that says differently. Again, I would refer back to the effective practice in preschool education, because they have shown in a longitudinal study that those children engaged in really good quality, and that's where I would say that it isn't. There is minimal difference for children who don't engage in quality program.
What Wise Women Want. I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski. And today we have been this is Charlottesville Public Access Television, and we have been talking about daycares, preschools, and home care. And we hope that you've learned an awful lot. Please go to our website, www.whatwisewomenwant.com, to learn more about this topic and to learn more about our panelists. Join us next week when we'll be talking about Obamacare. Join us every week. We hope to, and write in, please, and give us any kinds of information about any subject that you'd like to talk about. Thank you, and have a good evening.